I mean, posing is a kind of another whole nother lecture I could get into. I don't really have time to today, but obviously working from video reference in this case was quite helpful because my poses in the video reference were pretty strong, but that's not always the case. These were pretty useful poses. As you can see, they're pretty dynamic. There's lots of angles going on. It was a very fast action that I had to use a lot of muscles for, so my body contorted and pulled in ways that were fun and interesting. And I pushed them a little bit more. That's all I did. I didn't go crazy. Also, you have the rig to work with. Sometimes if I'm going to do this action with a rig that, like, if I was to do it with Stan or Stella, you know, this pose I did on Stewart might not look as appealing. You know, you have to adjust the pose based on the rig. And that's why you try to get reference with proportionally similar characters. So it's really nice to film reference of a female character doing female actions because you get the weight shifts to work better and so forth. If you have a character like Stan, well, maybe you got a super muscle body friend who can wear like 3 jackets. I don't know. But he's ridiculous proportions, like Mr. Incredible. And I remember I went to a lecture with John Cars, who is now a director, but he used to work at Pixar, and he's one of the Pixar legends, like Doug Sweetland. And he did a bunch of shots on The Incredibles. And one shot he did, actually have it here, let me show you really quick because it's pretty applicable to this. So there's a shot in here. He did all these shots of this parent fight in the first Incredibles movie. This is his whole section. And I went to a class back in 2005, 15 years ago, when animation was just becoming awesome in 3D. This was like the first movie that I was like, whoa, blown away. But he did all these shots, and he talked about his workflow for them. And this shot in particular really interested me because I hadn't thought about 3D animation this way. So I'll just play this shot really quick.
Keep creating new ways to celebrate mediocrity, but if someone is genuinely exceptional, then
So it's a shot where he's acting and gesturing and moving around. It's complicated. It's a difficult shot, right? It's a body mechanics shot. And he said he's not great at body mechanics. I mean, he's at Pixar, so he's probably pretty good, but he's an actor. He's an actor's actor. That's what he said. So he filmed his reference, and he said, my reference was useless because he's this 6'3" gangly guy, and Mr. Incredible's, well, maybe he's 6'3", but he's not gangly. Completely different proportions, tiny little gorilla legs, and a massive body. So the steps and the movements that John Cars was taking were useless, completely useless, and he couldn't find anything on the internet for gorilla walks 3 steps, angrily turns around and points at wife. what are you going to do? Where are you going to find that, right? So what he did is he used his reference in the way he could, and I haven't seen his reference, I wish I could. What he uses is reference from the upper body. He had this pose, and he had this pose. His legs looked nothing like this, and he had this pose, and those were his blocking poses, and this pose, and probably this pose where he was kind of faced away, and then he had this pose where he turned around and was pointing, and then he moved back towards his invisible wife he was acting against. So he did it all with the upper body and the legs turned off. He didn't even think about the legs. And then once he got the timing working and felt it like it was right, he just started putting the legs where they worked. Because when you watch that shot, nobody cares about his legs. They're not important. And if you actually watch his legs, they're kind of doing weird stuff. Even though it looks good, watch his legs.
Psychotic. They keep creating new ways to celebrate mediocrity, but if someone is genuinely exceptional, then
they kind of slide around and they pivot on one spot, and it works completely. But you're not looking at his legs. You're looking at what's important is the acting, and that's when he made me go, you know. I was always trying to make things work, and he was like, what's important is the performance, and not breaking it with the mechanics. And that changed my animation a lot when I thought about that as a workflow tactic. You have to understand body mechanics to a good level to do what he did, because he made it work. But he did not focus on the body mechanics. He did not care about the body mechanics. And after he got the legs in the right place, he probably layered in a little bit of up and down on the right spots, because as you go over a passing position on your leg, you know, you're standing up taller. As you go into the stride, you drop. He probably layered in a little bit of mechanics on the upper body that he'd gotten worked so nicely, because it was probably just moving left and right or whatever. But if you think about that process, it's really useful when you're doing acting. But when you're doing a body mechanics shot, what's important is the mechanics. Like in the first 3 or 4 classes you'll have an animation mentor or schools, you'll be focusing on mechanics. in this shot, this is not an acting shot. So I'm trying to make the mechanics feel perfect. But when you're doing acting, the mechanics become secondary. They just can't, you can't let them distract. A lot of VFX films, King Kong, Ripping, all Godzilla, Transformers, those are body mechanics shots. Everything has to work and look cool. But when you look at Tangled or The Incredibles or a lot of these films, these are acting things. Of course, there's body mechanics shots. Body mechanics are not important compared to the acting. It's secondary. But you have to understand how mechanics work to know, oh shit, his weight's on his left foot. I'm going to move his translate X over that left foot so it doesn't look like he's going to fall over. And that's where you learn the basics so you can at least compensate for that later on. Okay, so I kind of went on a big tangent there, but for posing, yeah, posing is working off reference and then trying to make it better. And if I was going to do another lecture, I would explain some things, but basically that comes from experience. Drawing a lot helps, but getting good at posing is animating for years. You'll get better. Glenn Keane's a better poser than he was when he was 50 at 70. And if he keeps animating until he's 90, he's going to be better at 90 than he was at 70. You know, he's always going to get better at posing. You always observe and you learn. There's not a quick shortcut for posing. It just takes time. All right, there's a question about constraint. Isn't the constraint with the chest creating some counter animation in the object? Yes, it is. It is wherever the chest moves, the object is moving. So to get the object to move not with the chest, for example, if I want to pull away the chest and this is heavy so it stays back, I have to actually animate it away. But I don't have to animate the hands away because the hands will go with it. So I was trying to find the simplest way to do the work I need to do, and for me, most of the time it was going to be following the chest pretty close, so I didn't have to do too much of this, because a lot of times he's really straight and then he swings through, but really what I was getting was the free movement with the body, so as he jumps forward, even if I do translate this a little bit back, it's coming along for the ride, which is what I wanted to do, because if it was just constrained to master space and I move forward, his arms would go and lock out, and you'd get, you'd have to end up doing a lot more work than what I did with the chest. Another thing you might notice is you might hear my keyboard going a lot and things happening. I like to teach my students hotkeys, and some hotkeys I use that are very, very useful are previous and next frame. So you can see here, I'm just clicking 1 and 2. My fingers are up on the keyboard near where you would have translate, rotate, right? So if I'm going to move this around, I have the E for rotation, W for translation. So my hand's already up there a lot. So if I have 1 and 2 on there, I can quickly go between my keys without having to go down here, go way over here and click. So it kind of saves time, and it becomes, your brain stops working and it starts working more artistically and less technically because you're stopping to do actions and it starts to become subconscious. The more hotkeys you can use of things that you do repetitively, the more you'll get into a flow and be a faster animator. I'm known as one of the fastest animators in the industry, and it's one of the reasons for sure is because of the hotkeys, definitely. So this is 2 important ones, and if I hold down the Alt key, which is next to the space bar, and I do those same 2 keys, you can't see this now because this is the step, but if you watch the timeline, you can see it's going 1 frame at a time forward. So then I can scrub by frames. And now I do this now without thinking. So if I have to go to someone else's computer and animate on their computer, I'm always like, I feel like I'm stuck in the dinosaur age and I can't do stuff because I'm so used to just doing it freeform. But hotkeys are very useful. I have a hotkey for delete key. You know, anything that you do a lot, write it down. If you find yourself going to menus a lot of times to do actions, write down that action and be like, I want to make a hotkey for this, because it's quite simple. You just go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Hotkey Editor, and you know, all those things I was just showing you, for example, they're in the editors under, menu items. Menu items, animation, playback. So you can see here, You have to kind of navigate for these sometimes. But here's next key. It's already a Maya option, and I just put the 2 on it. And previous key is 1. Next frame and previous key are Alt 1 and Alt 2. I think they're default keys in Maya, and they're like the little arrow keys down by the M, I believe. I'm not sure. But you can set them up however you want. And if you want a custom key and you can't find it here, you can make your own custom scripts. You can see I have like 10 custom scripts. One being copy and paste, because the Maya copy and paste, Control-C, Control-V, doesn't copy and paste keys, which to me is pretty ridiculous. So I made it copy and paste keys, fairly useful. Euler filter, reset my pose, makes all the things. And NURBS curve toggle, how useful is that? You don't have a picker turning off and on, so you don't have to go up to the window, accidentally click the wrong one, turn off and on NURBS curves, right? So these are all workflow things that you can add to your, and after like a week of using it, you don't think about it anymore. And then every time you use someone else's computer, you think their computer's broken.